This is the Riverview Hotel that once stood at the banks of the Mississippi in Cape Girardeau. It was one of the most famous hotels in the region until 1916 when it burned to the ground. In October of 1909, President Taft was doing a tour from St. Louis to New Orleans via Mississippi River. And on that trip, he would stop by in Cape Girardeau. He would go on to give a speech at Academic Hall and leave. That was it. He was only there from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. That little tidbit right there is one of many interesting tales that have taken place at the Cape Girardeau Riverfront and Water Street area. This is one of my personal favorites. It's so stunning it almost looks photoshopped. This picture at the latest was taken in 1916 because this hotel burned down in a huge fire that year. And here is the same building in a different season, maybe spring or fall. On the other side of the river wall, we have a photo right after the wall was built. It shows the original bridge, which at the time was 30-something years old. It would be removed 40 years later. Riverboats have always made their presence known in Cape. This is one of many that have come through over the years. And judging by the cars, I'm guessing the 1950s, and once again, you can see the old bridge in the background. The SM&A train station was a popular spot for travelers entering and leaving town. This building was around until 1920. Ragsdale's was a popular spot for locals back in the day. It was a place where you could get clothes and generic items. The famous old bridge once again makes an appearance in the background. This amazing aerial view shows the second train station on the far left. Also in the same area, it looks as if the Riverwall construction started. And this is the Riverwall entrance during its construction. Once again, you'll notice the bridge. The Port Cape building was constructed in 1836. It's most famously known as the location of Ulysses S Grant as his headquarters at the beginning of the Civil War. On the side of the building, you'll notice a Coca-Cola mural. It was originally painted in 1940 and restored in 1978 after the Coca-Cola Company agreed to support the restoration because of historical significance. And just last summer, it was restored once again. In December of 1974, David Knight opened the Port Cape restaurant, which is what it is today. Cape has had two train stations near the riverfront. The first one was called the SM&A station. It was located at the foot of Broadway and Water Street. It served the Frisco until about 1920 when a new station was built at the south end of Water Street, which is currently the big parking lot next to the wall. An interesting fact about the railroad is the original tracks were removed during the construction of the river wall and were installed on the west side of the old tracks. In 1907, the local paper announced that a man by the name of W.B. Ragsdale had purchased stock of general merchandise and would establish a ready-to-wear store for men, women, and children, the first of its kind in the region. It closed in 1982, and in 1998, it reopened as a restaurant and bar. In 2002, they opened a microbrewery, and for a while, it was the only one of its kind between St. Louis and Memphis. There was a brief period where this reopened as a bar. I believe it was around 2017. I remember going there, but it lasted maybe just a year or so. In 1909, President Taft visited Cape. He arrived to give a speech at Academic Hall and left immediately after. His flotilla arrived at 6 a.m. and he was gone by 7 a.m. There was a local contractor named Edward Regenhart who was good friends with Taft. I've read from numerous sources that he was primarily responsible for setting up the event. The president was doing a tour from St. Louis to New Orleans via the Mississippi River and would later visit Cairo that same day. Cape is no stranger to floods, especially before the river wall was built. One of the worst floods was in 1927. For some time, it was considered the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. It was the event that actually kick-started the plans to build the flood wall. The construction of the wall began in 1956 but wasn't completed until 1964. The mural was painted by Chicago artist Thomas Melvin in collaboration with local artists, and was dedicated at a public ceremony on July 7th, 2005. The original mural was designed in 1991 by Fred Lincoln, a mural artist from Memphis who grew up in Cape. It was repainted in 2002, but erosion took away its appeal and it was recently painted over. So to wrap up some of our main points here. In 1836, the Port Cape building, not the restaurant, the building was constructed. And in 1863, General Grant temporarily used it as his headquarters during the Civil War. In 1907, Ragsdale's opens as a general merchandising store. 2 years later, President Taft visits from St. Louis on his way to New Orleans. The Riverview Hotel would burn down in one of the biggest fires, if not the biggest, in Cape Girardeau history. The SM&A train station is no longer in use. In 1920, a new train station would be built on the other side of Water Street. And the flood of 1927, which is one of the worst disasters in the entire nation's history, sparks the initiative for the Riverwall. In 1940, the Coca-Cola mural is painted. The following decade, the construction of the Riverwall begins, and 8 years later, it would be completed. In 1974, Port Cape, the restaurant, is established, and in 1982, Ragsdale's closes. In 1991, the original Riverwall mural was painted on the riverside. In 1998, Ragsdale's opens as a restaurant, and in 2021, the new Riverwall mural was painted on the riverside. From the days of General Grant using the building as his Civil War headquarters to what it is today, the Port Cape restaurant, this has been before and after.